We are now joined on the Cowherd Global Network by one of the best football writers and podcasters in the world, relatively new father, New Yorker, fan of the U, Kevin Clark. Kevin, you watch a lot of college football. Am I over the top or not even extreme enough on Caleb Williams? And what did you think of what I just said about the Cardinals?
So the Cardinals have the opportunity to have the best draft haul in the history of football. If you consider what the draft looks like next year, as far as quarterbacks, as far as Marvin Harrison Jr., and what the Texans might do as far as giving them the second overall pick or even the first overall pick, depending on how it all shakes out. I do think there'll be some accidental tanking teams that we think are going to be okay now and end up getting in that top 2, top 3. There's always one of those teams. But I want to push back on one thing, Nick, which is that playing Colt McCoy is also a tanking move. Like, I love the idea of, like, oh, no, they're really in on the tank. They cut Colt McCoy. What did you guys think Colt McCoy was? Did anyone watch Colt McCoy in the preseason? Does anyone watch Colt McCoy the last few years? Like, they still would have lost a whole bunch of games even with old Colt there.
Okay, that's a fair point. I am also, by the way, is that painting behind you a Ken Keeley painting? Because if it is, yes. I have that painting. I have that painting, Kevin Clark.
We love newsstands. There are no more newsstands.
We do.
They only exist in the living rooms of you and I and other people who read newspapers when we were 5.
That's true.
The last time anybody bought a newspaper.
So, all right, one more thing on the Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
Does the NFL, if one of the accidental tanking teams ends up being the Las Vegas Raiders, does the NFL need to realign? And I'm joking only partially.
I get what you're saying.
What I'm saying is, if Caleb Williams ends up in the AFC, do we need to do something about, of our 10 best quarterbacks, 9 are in one conference? Like, I know that sounds, I'm a little tongue-in-cheek, but the NFL wants Caleb and or Drake to end up in the NFC, right?
Sure, but on the other hand, there'd be some reaction to that would then even out. Some of the AFC teams might give up their quarterbacks to the NFC. What I'll say is if the AFC West gets Caleb Williams, then Roger Goodell is going to email Jeff Bezos and the head of NBC and the head of all these networks and say, guess what? Primetime games for the AFC West, the price is going up. We just added $10 million per game. Here you go. It's Caleb Williams against Patrick Mahomes twice a year. Like, that's fine. They're going to be fine with that, okay? Listen, Caleb Williams is – you said he was as close to a sure thing as sure things get. Drake May is not far behind that. There's a crop of quarterbacks on the second cut that I'd love to be able to see more of. Someone even like talking to some of my draft nerd buddies, someone like Riley Leonard at Duke who flashed last year. There was some kid at UTEP over the weekend in week 0 who's making 80-yard darts. So we still have to see how that all is going to shake out. And listen, what the Texans do and allow the Cardinals to do is so important, because what if the Texans just say, screw it, we're going to take, the Cardinals say, screw it, we're going to take Marvin Harrison? What if they say, we're going to hold an auction for the first pick and then take even more draft picks and then, take whoever they want with the second pick? Like, the options are endless. And that's why, Nick, and this is important, everybody talked about the process with the Browns and, Sashi Brown's doing it right, he's tearing it down. I was a believer at that point. But then I started to be around some other teams. The Bengals are a good example. The Dolphins are a good example. It takes 2 years to rebuild the NFL. It should. You should have a proof of concept at the end of year 2 for what you're going to be.
I agree.
Anything longer than that, NFL careers don't last that long. The guys become expensive if they're on their rookie deal after 2 years and after 3 years. And so the window is just smaller for a rebuild. I mean, the NBA, it's different because you get one player and you're off to the races and everything changes. You're the Orlando Magic, you're Paolo Banchero, you know what you are for the next 10 years, right? That ain't the case in the NFL. Even if you get a quarterback, you can screw that up. So it takes 2 years to do this rebuild. The Cardinals are playing it exactly right. And I wonder now, as this goes on, if the Texans are as well, because I've got real questions about their all-in on Will Anderson.
Well, me as well. Also, you just won me $100 because I made a 10-to-1 wager on $10 that the Magic would be mentioned on this show sometime today without me doing it. That was a bit of a rigged bet. I knew you were coming on. I was like, he'll find a way to get Paolo Banchero in there some way or another. Surprised it wasn't Jalen Suggs. All right. What was your Friday afternoon You're probably done for the week, spending time with your wonderfully talented wife and child. I assume the child will be talented, maybe a little young to see, but definitely talented wife. And you see the Trey Lance trade. What was your immediate reaction? And now that you've had a few days to digest it, what is your take?
I didn't know I knew so many people who knew so little about football to think that this was a Dak Prescott move, because I don't think it was. And I was going through Twitter and everybody's saying, even our beloved Ben Solak, who I love so much, starts screen grabbing Dak Prescott's contract numbers and to show that there's an out after 2023 or that you can get out of it in 2024, whatever it is, even with a dead cap charge. This is about Cooper Rush and Will Grier and those guys. And, people have pointed this out, Nick, but Josh Dobbs went for a 5th-round pick. That's just the cost of a backup quarterback right now. It's the cost of any quarterback. That's what we were talking earlier about Carson Wentz went for a first-rounder. It's always inflated. The idea that Jerry Jones is saying, I've got a succession plan for Dak Prescott. It's a guy who, by the way, couldn't thrive in Kyle Shanahan's offense. That in Kyle Shanahan's practices, he didn't look good. This is a quarterback-proof offense. He didn't look good enough to even be in the real competition this year. All of a sudden, Mike McCarthy is going to get him ready to replace Dak Prescott. It's ludicrous. I thought it was I think it's a good home, relatively speaking, where he'll get to go, even though it's Dallas. There's not going to be a ton of pressure on him. He can get some reps, but he's got to play, and that's the thing that really worries me. And you wonder if he's going to get to year 6 and 7, and he's just not going to have a lot of game film under his belt. That's why you wish maybe there was an option for somebody like a Tampa Bay, where if things go south, he could play the second half of the season or something like that, come in for Baker in fourth quarters or whatever. But at some point, it becomes a really bad thing that you don't have a lot of game film, and at some point, the fact that we don't know if he's good, at some point the league just gives up on you. And I know that he had good pre-draft evals and teams fell in love with him and all that stuff. But I hope from a football success story he gets someplace, maybe a year after next, whatever, and he's just able to put some regular season game film on, because this just isn't the place. This shows nothing about how they feel about Dak Prescott. It's everything to do about how they feel about the quarterback depth.
So I agree with you with this addendum, and then I want to talk Niners. When it comes to Dak Prescott is this. I feel like there was massive pressure on Dak before this trade, and it's for this very simple reason, and here's where the contract to me does matter. Dak has 2 years left on his deal, and they cannot franchise tag him. They can't. They don't have that option. So after this year, Dak is going to be able to go to the Cowboys and say, I want the best contract in NFL history. And if you don't give it to me, I'm going to be a free agent at 31 years old, and there's nothing you can do about that. Because of that, Kevin, I think that this year is a bit of the fork in the road for Dallas and Dak. If they're as good as I think they're going to be, he's going to get that contract. He'll be there for the next 5 years. If he scuttles again this season, they're not giving him that deal, and I think he has shown, okay, I'm fine playing out a deal and then getting twice the Kirk Cousins deal. So in that regard, take Trey Lance out of it. I do think this year is the determinative factor on whether or not Dak is a essential lifelong Dallas Cowboy, or if he becomes the most sought-after quarterback free agent we've had in our lifetimes, really.
So I agree with that part, but Trey Lance doesn't kneecap Dak Prescott's leverage at all. I think the leverage that Dak Prescott has, aside from the fact that he's going to be the best quarterback on the market, and we'll say, listen, he's better than Kyler Murray, but if Kyler Murray becomes available, Kyler Murray's a Texas guy, let's just keep an eye on that, okay? Sure. But you try telling CeeDee Lamb and Zach Martin and those guys on the offense who are ready to win now that we're going to roll with Trey Lance, or anybody, or we're going to draft a quarterback, whatever. The problem is, if you could replace a quarterback and a good quarterback that easily, everybody would do it. Everybody would do it every season. Kirk Cousins got 3 years guaranteed when nobody else is getting that for obvious reasons, because that's just what the market will bear. And I remember talking to Rick Spielman about that. I said, why'd you do it? Well, because somebody else would have. That's the way. By the way, Kirk Cousins is another guy who might be available this time next year, or 8 months from now, whatever it is. And so it's what do you got?
No, I was going to say Kirk Cousins. No, Kirk Cousins coming available, and I think he's coming to a Bay Area near you, because Kyle Shanahan's lifelong dream of Kirk Cousins being his quarterback. So that's where I wanted to go, was the Niners. The Niners, to me, everyone wants to give them credit for Brock Purdy. I do not. First of all, I don't know if he's good yet. Second of all, they passed on him. They had 3 6th-round picks. Not second. They had 3 6th-round picks. They're like, nah, don't want him. And so there's an element of, you live in a very fancy, I assume, exclusive neighborhood. Someone new moves in next to you. You're like, oh, what do you do for a living? And it's like, oh, I started a business. You're like, oh, good for you. He's like, actually, it went bankrupt. It's like, really? He's like, yeah, then I won the lottery. You don't get credit. And the business they started was Trey Lance. The San Francisco 49ers said, we don't want the caretaker quarterback. We want to invest so much in this position so we can be unbeatable, which, by the way, I think that team with an awesome quarterback would be pretty close to unbeatable. To pull the plug on that for the final pick of the draft coming off elbow surgery, I know everybody loves Kyle's play design, and I do too. And they're great at finding Hufanga in the 5th round. I appreciate all of that. I feel like it can be said they have butchered the quarterback position 6 years in a row. Is that unfair?
It's not unfair. What I'd say is that the focal point of finding a Shanahan quarterback is literally just running the system. And I think Kyle Shanahan's starting to learn that, is that's what he wants, a guy who can run the Shanahan system who's not necessarily the best quarterback. That's why, and it's not just Kyle Shanahan, it's all of the Shanahan, McVay tree guys. They all love Kirk Cousins. And if you get one beer in them, they all say, Kirk can do like 90% of what my guy can do, whatever it is, right? Like there's 10 of those guys, and they all have the same exact feeling about Kirk Cousins. And it's because they can run the offense. I think that's one of the things. I was in Atlanta the other day, and somebody was talking about Desmond Ridder. And I'm not comparing Ridder with any of these guys, but they were saying, listen, Ridder can make blind throws and fire it in there on play action, and like that's 70% of what a lot of these coaches want. They don't want the best quarterback. They want the best quarterback for their offense. And so what Shanahan, I think, the Brock Purdy thing is a resignation towards, we just want a guy who can do what I tell him, frankly. And that's kind of what you see. And that's why, look, like Matt LaFleur made great strides letting Aaron Rodgers have a ton of say in that offense and having audibles and all of that stuff. That's not normal for the Shanahan system. Normally, it's just a lot of, okay, here's the play, do it the way it's written. And that's what Brock Purdy does. And I think as long as he can do that, Kyle Shanahan's comfortable with him. Or I assume Sam Darnold has a higher ceiling just from what we saw pre-draft. Maybe you can mold him into that guy as well.
All right, more likely, the Jets finish first in the AFC East or the Jets finish last in the AFC East?
So this is a question about whether or not the Patriots with Mac Jones and an actual offensive staff can leapfrog the Jets. I'm less optimistic on the Jets than maybe most people, certainly around the tri-state area, yeah. But I think the answer is first. The answer is they're more likely to finish first, only because I don't see a lot of scenarios in which this Patriots team is ready to win this year that big.
They won 8 games last year. They were terrible and won 8 games.
They had a really good defense. They had the second best defense in the NFL by EPA, I think, in the last 10 weeks of the season.
Yeah, sure.
And they have a lot of talent, obviously. But I think that the Jets have a better roster, 1 through 53. They have less question marks, even with the question marks in the offensive line. And they have Aaron Rodgers, who's better than Mac Jones. I think that Aaron Rodgers really was not the guy he's been, and I think that it took a while for everybody to reckon with that, including the Packers coaching staff over the course of the season. He was not that guy. He was banged up. It sounds like he wasn't bought in 100% of the way in Green Bay, not showing up for stuff in the summer. That stuff showed up eventually. But I think 1 through 53, 1 through even 20, which is what matters in the NFL, it's the Jets over the Patriots. So I'm gonna take Jets finishing first, more likely than last. But I still don't love their chances of finishing first. Sorry, that was a weird answer. It's a terrible
it's
answer.
Fine. It was a curveball I threw at you. It wasn't something we discussed, and it was kind of a loaded question because here's there is a level of expectation that the Jets have embraced that I think is idiotic, just personally. I think that for them to set up that both of these things could happen, you could have the best year your franchise has had in 12 years by a mile, and it's a massive disappointment, is one of the dumbest expectation setters possible, and that's where they've set themselves up to be. And when Your biggest question marks are your offensive line might be a total train wreck. We don't yet know if your coach is good at the game management stuff. And your quarterback's turning 40 and coming off the worst year of his career. Those, to me, are flashing. And, by the way, you have the toughest opening half dozen games any team in the league has. These are all reasons why I'd be like, hey, 10-7, make the playoffs. And then next year, Aaron's going to be back. But instead, it's like, if they're not in the AFC title game, it's going to be considered a disaster. And Salah's going to get fired, and Rodgers is going to tell Woody Johnson, I'm only coming back to play for Nat Hackett. Mark that down. I want to trademark that take. That Rodgers like, I could retire, or I could play for Nat Hackett. But go ahead.
It's funny because someone had once told me, and I've said this before, that one of the problems, someone smart who'd worked for the Jets, had told me one of the problems is that the Jets are uniquely in tune with the media of New York. Like, they really listen. When the back page of the tabloids gets excited, they get excited along with them. They sometimes listen to outside voices in ways they shouldn't with the media, particularly the New York media, and just how there's a lot of movements within the New York media where they'll say, okay, now we got to do this. They got to go all in this year. This is the year they take the leap, that kind of stuff. And the Jets over the past 20 years have listened, when I think that overall, Nick, you know this, the best course of action in all things is to ignore us and anything that we say if you're running a team, okay? That's just the way it goes. And so I don't know Robert Saleh that well. I've talked to him once in my life, but it seems to me like they're taking on the expectations of the fans and the media. And I just think that's a real mistake when you don't know what this team looks like. You don't know. And Aaron Rodgers, I was on a Bills show a couple of weeks ago, and somebody said to me, because everybody's so excited. Everybody said all they needed to have was a quarterback who's not Zach Wilson, and they would have made the playoffs last year, which, by the way, is obviously true if you just look at the results. But one of the Bills reporters asked me, what happens if the Bills go up 14-0 or 20-0 in the first half? Is the air going to be let out, and can they recover from that? And I think they can, but right now everything is set up so emotionally and set up with such momentum that I get really concerned about what happens. You mentioned their early season, September, and you're playing Belichick. Like, what happens if they start 1-3 and everybody says, "Oh my God, this isn't happening the way I envisioned it"? Everything should be incremental. Everything should be under promise, over deliver. And I felt like they flipped that a little bit. And I understand the expectations of Rodgers. I'm a big Aaron Rodgers guy generally, but I just feel like you could have, we were joking. I had Charles Robinson on my podcast a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about the fact that, they didn't want the attention from Hard Knocks. And Charles was joking. He was saying, Joe Douglas was on Boomer Esiason's stage a week before the trade saying he's coming. Aaron Rodgers is coming. Like, they love this attention. That's why you make the trade for Aaron Rodgers. And so I think the posture they've taken over the past couple of months might come back to bite them.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the problem with being the off-season vibes team is if the vibes shift, it affects you worse than other teams. All right, last one, and I'll let you go. Have you publicly made your Super Bowl pick yet?
No,
I'm not going to ask you to
do it here. No, I can do it here. I can do it here because I'm doing Chris Long's podcast, and he asked me to do a bunch of stuff tomorrow, so I might as well just get it done now.
Okay, so is it the Chiefs, or are you wrong?
It's the Bengals over the Dallas Cowboys.
Oh, my God. Well, I don't mind the Cowboys part of it. Listen, you're a basketball fan, and I said this yesterday, I'll say it again. Eventually, the rest of my media colleagues will recognize the Chiefs have entered the 90s Bulls territory, where they're just the right answer. They have the best player and the best coach, and they're the best-built team. And people don't pick them because it's boring. The Bengals is Joe Burrow going to get a contract? The Bengals, they're going to the Super Bowl. Why doesn't he have his contract yet? Where's that? What's going on there? We don't know. They're cutting Trevor Siemian. I don't know.
The Bengals are not used to spending this sort of money. Let them adjust to it. They're selling naming rights to the stadium. They got to get there. Although I'm gonna bring up my theory again. Instead of having Paycor Stadium, which is the naming rights to the stadium over the long term,
this is a great theory.
Stadium, they should just sponsor the contract. Paycor should have said it is the Joe Burrow contract brought to you by Paycor.
Yes.
Instead of the naming of the stadium. Much better bang for your buck.
Way better bang for your buck. Kevin Clark, read him on The Ringer. Listen to him on the Ringer Podcast Network. Listen to him on Chris Long's podcast. He's everywhere. Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate it. I'll talk to you later, Red.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.